We have Yad with SAP, Emma with Stanford University, and Susan with Microsoft to give us some insight into what building the 2030 technology strategy looks like.
Hey, everybody. Oh, my goodness. So 2030, when I first saw the abstract for this talk, I thought, oh, that's so far away. And then I realized it's 4.5 years from now, and I had like a personal mental crisis. So anyway, I'm really glad you're here. I'm Susan. This is Emma Yad. We're going to start just by talking a little bit about where we are right now. So this notion of artificial intelligence, or whether how machines can think, is about 75 years old if you count back to when Alan Turing first asked that question. And then a few years later to the Dartmouth Conference, which is the first time that people really started using that term artificial intelligence. But obviously the last couple of years have been just, shown an insane amount of innovation and change. So I thought it would be good to just take a moment and reflect on what moment we're in now and what is happening right now. And I'm going to start with Yaad and his work, and then we'll go to Emma and her work, just to get their perspective. So go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It's great being here again. And yeah, just one line on myself. I'm running SAP Research and Innovation. It's a global R&D unit that's looking into, surprise, surprise, AI and how we can really invent the future of enterprise software. And I'm also the managing director of SAP Labs US. I have the privilege to oversee the 5,000 people development force we have here in the US. And as for your question, of course, you are right, Susan. AI have been there for a while. We are now what's considered to be the fourth generation of AI, which is the generative AI. I had the privilege to be a hands-on developer in the previous generation, the narrow AI, and now really we see a kind of a paradigm shift of what AI bring to the table. And for us, of course, the generative AI and all the attention mechanism and the transformer architecture gave a lot of new possibilities. And what we are seeing basically is three things in the enterprise where the current generation of AI provide a lot of value and disruption. The first one of them is everything regarding the user experience. For the first time, AI really disrupt how user engaging with the software, and where we don't see a lot of the, when we talk about transaction and analytics, all the Excel looking like pie charts and others, great work from Microsoft, by the way, Susan, but we are seeing now everything becoming co-pilot and more autonomous over how user can work, like ChatGPT with kind of a co-pilot assistant body that help them. The second part is around the application layer. For those of you doing like expense approval or working with human resource software and so forth, thing becoming much more automated. This is what this kind of generation of AI help us to achieve. And this is where we are seeing, we are embedding in SAP around 500 AI agents inside the application, and it helps us to drive much more automation of the application. It's still not, of course, the human is always in the loop and needs to be there to supervise, but definitely we see a lot of increase in productivity gain and reduction of cost. And the last part that we are seeing is in the platform space. After the UX layer, after the application, we have a new tools and new type of engine that we need to provide as part of the platform, the engine that each enterprise runs on, the access to the model, how developers also, developer stories being changed as well with content generation and so forth. And here as well, we see also many concerns around the privacy and trust and all the platform, all the engine of the application and enterprises needs to have those components as well. So very fascinating time. And what we're seeing is a lot of disruption around the UX, the application, and the platform itself that provide all the tools to deal with this new treasure trove of options AI provided to enterprises.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Emma Brunskill. I'm an associate professor of computer science at Stanford. Delighted to be here. My own research focuses a lot on thinking about how does AI integrate with humans to drive societal value. And so I think one of the really interesting questions is that, of course, all of this software is being used in sort of a social technical system. And I think one of the big questions that my lab and some other labs at Stanford have been thinking about is how do we actually drive value from these new sorts of really exciting AI advances in order to, because there's a lot of concern by many people in lots of fields of whether or not these are going to take away jobs. And so one of the interesting papers that one of my colleagues just worked on, around Karankan in management sciences and engineering, was looking at how using these tools is framed. And this may be something that many of you guys are thinking about as well. And what they found was that if the manager framed this as productivity enhancing, people actually use the tools much less than if they were framed as sort of task enhancing. So you could imagine in one hand, you say, this is going to allow you to do things much faster. I'm expecting you to do, 1.5x amount of coding this week as what was possible before, or process this many more reimbursements or receipts or many other tasks. And another way to frame it is to say, this is going to allow you to help do all those projects you wish you had time to, or do more of the work you'd love to be doing by automating out the things that you don't like, or stretching into these new types of muscles and directions supported by AI. And they found that the people that were pitched sort of new AI tools as not productivity, but task enhancing, actually ended up using them a lot more. And they also ended up exploring how they could be used a lot more, which I think also can really drive value as people figure out how it actually augments their own workflow. And so I think that's a pretty big take home as we think about how do we translate some of the extraordinary capabilities of some of these systems into systems that really drive value for customers, for organizations and others, is that we need to think about how these are framed. So that's one of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of right now. Another thing that I think is important to consider is that the way that these models are trained right now continues to have focused on predictive loss, meaning we predict the next token accurately. But almost always now we're using these for downstream tasks where we want to optimize outcomes, whether revenue or something else. And one of the challenges is that often these sort of delayed signals might take a while to observe. Maybe you're interested in customer retention, maybe you're interested in click-through rate, things like that. Those can sometimes be delayed from the interventions that the AI system is driving. So one thing that my lab is very interested in is how do we get sort of short-term proxy signals of long-term outcomes in order to quickly evaluate these systems. I think that's a new direction, thinking about this sort of causal machine learning, so that these systems can, particularly in the agentic world, really be driving the outcomes that we most care about in order to create really good long-term outcomes, but do so in a way where the experimentation is cheap. I think that right now we're increasingly seeing a case where real life experimentation time is going to be the bottleneck. Actually gathering new data still continues to be very expensive, particularly as we want to move beyond passive data sources.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm particularly fascinated about these short-term signals because, any of you who have looked at web analytics and frankly, any kind of analytics know that you've got correlation versus causation problems. You've got questions about if they spend this much time on site or they bounce or they do whatever it is that they do, that can tell you something in the moment, but then in the long term, you don't necessarily know what they've done. And so the attribution of that behavior to some outcome in the future has been, that's something that we've been wrestling with for decades. So if you figure it out, you need to let us know.
I'll call you.
Because everybody's talking about value. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I think that we really all need to wrestle with, is that, there's business value and then there's also societal value, right? And very often these things are one and the same. It's not that your technical decision maker or your developer decision maker isn't also a human being and also, who lives in the world and also a business user and also, many, many other things. And so I think one of the challenges with AI, along with the fact that it's so difficult to quantify just simply because of the complexity of the whole thing, is figuring out how to create methodologies to understand value that are actually appropriate to the world that we're living in now. So I would just love to hear a little bit more, Yad, about sort of how you're thinking about that and how you're approaching it from a research perspective at SAP.
Yeah, so it's definitely everything is around the business value. So we are a corporate, so eventually we have a stakeholder, shareholders, and of course, eventually would like to bring some also financial value to our customers. And this is the top of mind for our customer, how we generate value from AI. And to be frank, there is a lot of hype out there, and many of the solutions out there, and many of the startups as well, from our observation, doing some technology for the sake of technology, and there is no clear business value. I'm talking in the enterprise level, coming to customer like Chevron or Nestle or big enterprises. And there are many, and there are different reasons to that. And the first thing is definitely start with identifying the business problem. I know it sounds a bit funny, but what you see today is a proliferation of many solutions out there that create great, jumping avatars and movies and others. Looks amazing, but the value, where do you see, hey, how did you help this enterprise to reduce the cost? Or how did you help to increase the productivity or task productivity or revenue? How you were able to mitigate risk and other things? Those mindset is not fully there when you come with AI, and you always need to start with a very detailed business problem and quantify the value you would like to achieve. The second point, which as a technologist, I can tell you it's very important, maybe it's a bit of abomination, but you don't need the latest and greatest AI for everything. Many of the solution, and I think I'm quoting Andre Neg here, 90% of the problems can be solved with supervised learning, and which is kind of a narrow AI. And then bringing all this expensive, generative, GPU-consuming AI, which is amazing, is like shooting a fly with a cannon sometimes. So also from value perspective and cost, you need to think about running and maintaining this, which is a big issue, and not everything which is sexy technology-wise will eventually provide the best value. And another point which is very important is the learning, because like I mentioned in my first answer, there is a treasure trove of options happening today with the generative AI. And you need the right champion and adaptability to pivot and adjust the use case as you go. Because sometimes you define, and I'll finish with that, you define like a solution that perceives the value for the users and how the user will interact in a certain way. But then she interact with this in a different way, and you need to adjust to make sure you're flexible, and you can really, disrupt your own ideas and provide new kind of solution, which is much more fun and harder when you have technology like AI. You can do much more generalization and you have much more freedom, but you also need to be very adaptable and learn and change. And even if you stop project, I'm very proud that in my unit as well, we stop a lot of projects and as well, and you just move on to learn to provide the best value for our customer. So definitely start with the business problems, have the right champion learning, and choose the right technology. Otherwise, it's very costly. It might be a little bit risky. Not always what shines provide the most. It's the ultimate goal.
I think maybe building on that as well, I do think also that there is a lot of opportunity to use these tools, particularly to augment capabilities in a number of cases. So for example, many of you might have seen a paper called Generative AI at Work. It was by my colleague, Eric Bernolfsen. To my knowledge, it was the first paper that showed that by augmenting novices, this was in a call center, by real-time generative AI prompts, they significantly improved customer satisfaction, and they increased retention from the call center providers. So I think that it really is useful to remind ourselves that in many cases that there really may be significant room to augment the work people who are using these technologies, particularly with lower amounts of skills or backgrounds. And this could even be applied to cases, as people are junior developers or junior managers in many cases, to be able to help upskill people very rapidly, ideally under this sort of frame of enhancement. So I think that there is a lot of opportunity. I do agree that there are many cases where sort of off-the-shelf standard AI techniques, particularly those that have been around over the last 10 to 15 years, often work extremely well for narrow test cases. So it makes sense to use those first, because the generative AI solutions often are very compute intensive, and there might be something, kind of in being the most resource effective possible. It makes a lot of sense in this day and age.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes the most exciting are not the right for the job, the right tool for the job. So, and actually, I've heard a lot of people ask, well, so does generative AI sort of supersede machine learning? And, I think people are now, and by people, I mean, not necessarily people in this room, but, business users are now starting to grok a little bit more that these are approaches and techniques that work together. And the question is, how do you actually orchestrate those approaches and techniques? I would love to hear a little bit about the incarceration example that you mentioned when we were chatting earlier. I think that's a really good one to sort of bring it home for folks.
Yeah, so together with Santa Clara County and my colleague Sharad Goel, who's a professor at Harvard, I had the opportunity to do a study where we were looking to understand, this is in terms of human augmentation. I think we often have a narrative that when people mess up in the United States, it's due to personal shortcomings. But what we found in this case is that providing small reminders to people to attend a court date, so you could imagine whether it's for something like, you have a driving ticket or something like that. Often you might assume if someone doesn't show up for for a court date. Perhaps they're a bad person. But the reality is that many of us are forgetful, myself included. And so we did a study led by a wonderful postdoc now, Professor Alex Trillis-Wood, providing people with reminders that they did have a court date coming up. And we found that not only did that substantially increase people attending their court date, it actually reduced incarceration. So it was a really good reminder, I think, of this fact that, all of us are cognitively bounded. We all have limited amounts of time and attention. And so this sort of automation, whether through narrow tools that could nudge people or very powerful tools like generative AI, really could greatly enhance a lot of the outcomes that we think about. And I think in these cases, people are often very grateful for those small reminders or small augmentations that allow them to accomplish what they might have wanted to anyway.
So I'm going to do something a little countercultural for a professor, which is to ask you to predict, because we promised 2030, so we got to pay off 2030. Would you mind just sort of giving us some thoughts about where you think this could go over the course of the next several years?
Yeah, so I'm sort of reticent to, predict a 2030, given that, the head of Anthropic and others often think that AGI is going to be here in 2 to 3 years. So I'm not sure I want to predict post-AGI. I will say that I think, for me as an academic and many others 5 years ago, the concept of AGI seemed still insane, and people weren't really seriously talking about it. Whereas now I feel like much of the field has just assumed this is going to happen in the next somewhere between 2 to 5 years. So I think that's an enormous change. And I will say that I don't think we're ready yet. I think we need to do a lot of really creative thinking about what that's going to mean to industries. So, what's it going to do to your workforce? I think that's a really important question. I think that the technologies will continue to increase substantially, even though we are sort of running out of, the internet data. I think that the techniques already are very, very impressive, and they're going to continue to get much, much better. So I don't like to predict, of course, as an academic, but I think that in particular, I'm very interested in how do we think about workforce retraining and how are we going to provide meaningful work to many people going forward, and what new opportunities will we have?
Emma, actually, I want to ask you this, and for you, Yad, as well. There's a broad range of understanding of what AGI means. So I would just love to hear from your perspective, how do you define AGI? And then Yad, if your thoughts are different, I'd love to hear that as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there are a lot of different definitions. The one that I tend to go with is at the point at which AI can do any sort of cognitive task, at least as well as, an average human or perhaps an average human in that profession. I will caveat that I don't think we're quite there yet with robotics. My colleagues like Chelsea Finn and Dorso Sadiq and, Gemini Robotics and others at Google and Pi, there's amazing work that's happening in robotics right now. I think that there's a big open question about how quickly that will progress. Though if you haven't had a chance yet, I recommend you to see some of the videos people are posting online of taking robots into random Airbnbs and having them clean up from scratch, which is kind of incredible. So I do think we're making progress there, but I think it might take more than 5 years till we have like a humanoid that can do any task that humans can. I don't think we're there yet. But in terms of a lot of the sort of, white collar jobs that just require cognitive processing, I think that we're going to make enormous strides in the next 5 years.
Thank you.
And Susan, I can combine your last two questions about the prediction and AGI together. So nobody can predict the future, but I can share SAP perspective that we have 6 pillars of research innovation where we see disruption for enterprises. The first one is, of course, the future of AI. I personally don't like AGI as a term. Like I said, I was a developer in the 3rd generation of AI, now in the 1st one. The 5th one is coming. We see a lot in Stanford, in Berkeley, and others, and this involved AGI. AGI for me is the fact that AI can now set their own goals. Yeah, I want to tell a dear AGI, dear AI, please do my expense approval and say, no, I want to learn French. This is kind of the consciousness you have. But there are many pieces for this. I don't think we're there yet. A few of the things that might be very exciting for us is that the transformer architecture, this generation is nothing comparing what is coming. A new type of like meta learning. AI actually learned to evolve and create agent by themselves. Emotional AI, taking emotion as well. Everyone is excited about understanding video and text and audio. Consciousness AI as well, to have some sort of a gut feeling. I can talk hours about it, but the way AI works today, generative AI, the attention mechanism is a sequence. Nobody can have a feeling if right, what's something going to happen. This is a topic that are being researched at the moment, and we start to apply them as new type of use case. So the future of AI and kind of definition of AGI is a big one. The second topic is the future of data. Emma said something very important. All the war data is running out. All the models we're kind of leveling the playing field, because all the Wikipedia was learned and others. So synthetic data generation, better quality of current data is very important to have the new step function, if you will, in AI progress, and great work from Stanford on connotation, W.E. Smith and others as well. Robotics is a big thing for us. I'm going to be very short, but it does work. I think something DeepSeek learned us. You can do much more with less, right? You put on the edge AI on a robot, and we showed a great demo 3 weeks ago in Orlando, how you do warehouse management with NVIDIA together, and it was very, very powerful. Quantum is a big thing. I'm not going to detail it too much, but optimization and so forth. But even for AI, quantum helped to do a paradigm shift in training algorithms that generate data. The future of UX is another disruption, where we're talking about this current generation, but my kids, Generation Alpha in 2030, going to hit the workforce. What are going to be their UX paradigms shift? I don't know if there is user research in the audience, but they need emotional connection for screens. They need adaptive screens. This is a totally different than the one we do today. And the last one is about the cloud architecture. Might sound a bit boring, but someone needs to take care about all the crazy agent workloads of the future, including security and privacy. It's an architectural problem. What is the future of SaaS and so forth? So I summarize: future of AI, data, robotics, quantum, UX, and the future of cloud architecture, data, and privacy. This is a sick thing we're seeing as disruption, and I can talk all the day on that.
Thank you so much. So, folks, we could only really scratch the surface of the surface of the surface here, but I think, you got a lot of insights out. I'm very, very grateful for that. Please give our guests a round of applause. Thank you.